The nation's credit rating takes another hit.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Schwab. Schwab offers investors choices like full-service wealth management, self-directed investing options, and trading on Thinkorswim. More at schwab.com. And by Yubico, makers of the YubiKey, which stops phishing and hacking attempts and protects the personal and business applications people rely on. Learn more at yubico.com.
From Marketplace, I'm Nova Safo in for David Brancaccio. There are three big credit rating agencies on Wall Street, and Moody's has now joined the other two in downgrading the top-notch rating of U.S. sovereign debt. It's a small change with big implications. Marketplace's Nancy Marshall-Genzer has more. Good morning.
Good morning.
So why did Moody's downgrade the nation's credit rating?
Yeah, Moody's downgraded the U.S. one notch on its 21-notch rating scale. And in a statement, here's how Moody's explained it. It said, its successive U.S. administrations and Congress have failed to agree on measures to reverse the trend of big deficits. And Moody's says if the 2017 tax cuts are extended, that'll add around $4 trillion to the deficit. Congressional Republicans are currently working on a bill that would continue those tax cuts.
All right. So, Nancy, this is not the first time the nation's credit rating is downgraded. It's not the second time. It is?
It is the third time, Nova.
Yeah.
The first time was in 2011 when Standard & Poor's downgraded the U.S. during a congressional standoff over the debt ceiling. Fitch did the same thing in 2023 after yet another long fight in Congress over the debt limit, and that almost led the U.S. to default on its debt.
So this is about debt and spending. What does it mean for U.S. borrowing costs and for consumers going forward?
Well, if you have a lower credit rating, it means you're in theory a bigger risk. That means investors demand a higher interest rate, and that is already happening with U.S. Treasury bonds, and things like mortgage rates and car loans are loosely tied to the 10-year Treasury bond. So when the U.S. government has to pay more to borrow, so do we.
All right, Nancy, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And we've been looking up countries with higher credit ratings now than the U.S. They include our neighbor to the north, Canada, as well as Australia and Sweden. Let's do the numbers. In pre-market trading, Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ futures are down in the 0.5% to 1.5% range. The 10-year Treasury yield is up 11 basis points, well above 4.5%. Shares of cryptocurrency exchange Coinbase are set to open lower, down almost 3%. The company this morning is set to join the S&P 500 index, the first crypto firm to do so.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Bitwarden Password Manager for Business, built to turn short-term security goals into long-term success, available at bitwarden.com. And by Total Wine and More, helping shoppers love what they find this summer season at TotalWine.com. Drink responsibly. Be 21.
In the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd in May 2020 and ensuing protests, public attention turned to the persistent racial wealth gap in America. The median black household still has only 15% as much wealth as the median white household. Today, in the first of a three-part series, Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman takes us to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to see how black prosperity has been built up and torn down over a century of racial violence and discrimination.
Today, Tulsa's historic black neighborhood, known as Greenwood, has a small cluster of shops and empty storefronts, a history museum, some vacant land and parking lots. It's sandwiched between railroad tracks and a freeway overpass. A far cry from 100 years ago, when Greenwood was known as America's Black Wall Street. Don Thompson, a local photojournalist, showed me around.
Shoeshine Parlor was right here at this corner. Billiard hall, where the parking lot is located. Barber shop.
Thompson says in the early 1900s, boosted by Oklahoma's oil boom, Greenwood was packed with black-owned stores, workshops, hotels, theaters, lawyers, and doctors' offices.
There were over 600 businesses. You can see where they had put little plaques here on the concrete. This is Mayles Brothers Shoes, destroyed in the 1921 massacre.
The Tulsa Race Massacre, when an armed white mob, supported by city and state officials, invaded Greenwood to loot and burn and killed hundreds. Carlos Hill teaches African American history at the University of Oklahoma.
a 40-block area, destroyed. 11,000 people made homeless. Millions of dollars in destruction that was never repaired, never repaid.
Until that point, says Hill, for blacks across the country who came to do business or take a vacation, Greenwood was
a promised land where black people can build business, own property, can actually exist in American society in an economically advantageous position.
But that prosperity and the intergenerational wealth it could have built are gone. There are a number of reasons: the massacre, redlining by banks and insurance companies, housing segregation. Today, only half as many black Tulsans own homes as white Tulsans. Back in 1920, the black homeownership rate was equal to that of whites. Black unemployment and poverty are much higher. Life expectancy is 5 years lower. Christy Williams is a descendant of massacre survivors and believes government has an obligation to redress racial violence of the past with compensation today.
We do need economic reparations. That's the only way we're going to close the gap. People will say, well, what is reparations? Reparations is cash. Reparation is land.
Williams and other advocates are lobbying for millions in public funds for black Tulsans.
We requested $25 million for housing for descendants. What we need is rooftops will help us get grocery stores back and other things that we need to have a viable community.
The housing reparations proposal was introduced in Tulsa City Council last year. At town meetings, some critics said that using taxpayer money to compensate descendants isn't fair to today's Tulsa residents who had nothing to do with the massacre 100 years ago. Legal efforts to obtain compensation for survivors have been rejected by the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And the local plan for compensation, if it ever passes, will likely face similar challenges in state court and the Republican-controlled legislature. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
And I'm Nova Safo with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.